Hello and welcome to the 45th live stream for the Melting Pot Forum here in 2020 since the COVID pandemic started. For those of you who maybe are used to going to Ostrava to take part in the discussions there, I'm sure you'll agree that the organizers have done a fantastic job of continuing their tradition of discussing the big issues that face the world. Of course, now we're doing it online. And today we're going to go on a tour of the world. We're going to look at the big decisions that are being made today in Russia, in Europe, in China, Australia, America, across the world, and in particular in relation to one thing, to the geography of those countries, the place in which they are situated, the scale, the size, the natural resources they have. How does that determine what they're doing today? And I have to start, and we're going to speak to the author of the book all about this subject. I have to say that a few years ago, I've been speaking about this, voicing my opinions on this subject for many years. And a number of years ago, my daughter, who's heard me say this many times, said, "I bought you the perfect book, because this explains everything you've been talking about." And that is the book. And in fact, so much so that my son, who didn't know that, then bought me a second copy of the same book written by Time Marshallem, who is our guest today. And so, Tim, firstly, welcome to this discussion to the Melting Pot Forum in 2020.
Díky, dobrý večer, and thank you very much for the invitation.
So I'm twice a customer of yours, I have to say, and I've read the book twice. Right. So and I've really enjoyed it every time. Tim, this discussion over the next 45 minutes is about geography and the importance it has in the way the world is happening, the geopolitics of the world, the decisions. Can you start, please, just by setting out just why geography is so important, how fundamental it is?
Called the book Prisoners of Geography. I know it's a bit provocative, but to introduce the idea that geography does imprison you, it restricts some of your choices. It can perhaps also open some doors, but it restricts your choices. And I can give you a couple of examples.
Yeah, please do.
Russia is probably the best one. It's probably the easiest to get hold of the concept. We all know the shape of Russia. We know what is in front of it. And what is in front of it to the west is mostly flat ground. Now, if nobody had ever invaded Russia from that direction, across that flat land, or if Russia had never gone the other way, this would be less important. And this is why it's not just geography, it is also the politics and the history and technology. But if you don't understand the geography, you can't put those other things into focus. So this flatland through which the French came, 1812.
This is northern
the Germans, 1914.
We're talking about
1941. Yeah. And many other times other people have gone through. There is a gap. And the gap is from the Baltic Sea to the Carpathian Mountains. An invading force, infantry, tanks, cavalry, cannot obviously go through the Baltic Sea, nor can it go over the Carpathian Mountains to reach Moscow. So this gap is 300 kilometers wide. And through that gap, they go back and forth over the centuries. If you're Russian, you are in a prison of geography. You have no choice. You will seek to dominate this flat land in front of you, to either control it completely or to have a power in it that answers back to Moscow, which of course was the Soviet Empire. And that place is called Poland. And that is why Poland changes shape every few centuries.
Now, many of the people watching this, of course, will be familiar with that story being based in the Czech Republic or the area around the Czech Republic. But right now, the issue that's in the news is Belarus and what's going on there. And it looks as though the current regime, backed by the Russians, is in danger of falling. So if you're Russian right now, if you're Vladimir Putin and the leadership of Russia, given the geography of Belarus, how does that affect your decision making?
Okay, first we must frame that by referring to Ukraine and what happened in Ukraine, and how Ukraine, again, lying in front of the flat land, in front of map of Moscow, for so long was in Russia's sphere of influence. And then 4 or 5 years ago, it flipped into the Western sphere of influence. This is where history and politics comes back. If you look at all the Warsaw Pact countries, former Warsaw Pact, Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic and Slovakia, they're all either in the EU or they're in NATO. What does this do to the Russian head? So that's what happened in Ukraine. And of course, they took Crimea for a warm water port. You must understand that to understand Belarus.
Tim, do you want to just explain the war? Some people will know that, but just briefly, they took the Ukraine and the Crimea because of the warm water port of Sevastopol, I guess. Yeah. Just explain why that was so important so we understand.
Russia could not get away with invading Ukraine. There would be a full-scale war. But what they needed more than anything was a warm water port. Again, you look at the map of Russia, to its north, for 9 months of the year, when the ships go north to try to get to the sea lanes, there is ice. They don't have a warm water port. The closest they have to it is in Ukraine, in Crimea, Sevastopol. And so once Ukraine has flipped into a different sphere of influence, and who knows, maybe would join NATO. I doubt it, but the Russians won't take this chance. Maybe Ukraine would say go. So instead, they took Sevastopol. They took the port. They've incorporated it into Russia. So, because this was, for them, an existential threat. Belarus is very important to them. Again, you look at the Baltic Sea. And on the Baltic coast, you see this place called Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad is part of Russia. Okay, there's 200 or 300 miles between it and the border with Mother Russia, but it's part of Russia. They have 15,000 troops there. They have ballistic missiles there. And then 80 miles inland from Kaliningrad, the border with Belarus begins. This is an 80-kilometer wide corridor. This is how they supply Kaliningrad, by land. Supposing Belarus suddenly becomes a friendly country to Paris and Berlin and London and Washington. And Belarus says to Moscow, no, you're not sending your troops and your goods through here. That's a real problem for them. Also, supposing Russia one day, I don't think it will happen, but they plan decades in advance. Supposing Moscow one day thinks, we'll have the Baltic states, we'll have Lithuania, we'll have Estonia. That 80-mile corridor is actually the border between Poland and Lithuania. If you cut it, which is very easy, if you have Russian troops in Belarus and Russian troops in Kaliningrad, you have cut the 3 Baltic states off from the rest of NATO. You can't supply them. So for Russia, Belarus is very, very strategically important. It's why, if Lukashenko looks like he will lose, I think Russia will intervene in some way. And the last bit, again, looking at the map, when you look at how Napoleon got into Moscow, how the Germans arrived almost at the gates of Moscow in 41, you see they go through Poland, into Belarus, past Minsk, and then into Russia at what's called the Smolensk Gate. The Smolensk Gate is between some hills and some rivers, and the geography pushes you must go through this route. That's why it's the gate. I mean, it's not a physical gate, it is nature. This is the gate, the door through which invading forces have come, and the way the Russians have come the other way. If they lose Belarus, the gate is open. They will intervene one way or another if Lukashenko goes down. It looks like he'll go down because of geography.
So the geography means we have to assume they cannot allow that to happen for the reasons given. What about when you look from Russia to the rest of Europe? Now, we know, of course, there is deserved paranoia by Russia. They've been invaded from that side many times. But what is the Russian, given Russians' weakness in many ways now, if you look out at Europe and the EU and Britain and the rest of Europe from Russia, what is going through your mind in terms of the geography of Europe?
Yeah, it's so important to, when you're trying to understand a situation, to look at it from different sides. And so you must get inside Moscow's head. You must put yourself in Moscow and look in this direction. And what you see in front of you is this flatland, this gap, what has happened in Ukraine. What you see in the last 300 years of your history is that you have been invaded from that direction about once every 40 years. I think we are no threat to Russia whatsoever, but I understand, if I put myself in Moscow's head, why they think we are a threat. Every single Warsaw Pact country is now in the EU. The Russians believe that the EU is the door that you open and go into the room before you then go into NATO. So that's what's going on in their heads. Secondly, the really clever ones who know the statistics know that Russia is getting weaker, not stronger. They know that their oil will become less valuable over the decades as we learn not to use oil as much. Gas will take longer, but oil, 2, 3, 4 decades maybe. They know their population is not growing and probably is declining. They know they have no diversification. All they have is their energy. So they are becoming weaker. And a country is very dangerous when it knows that it's weaker, because it knows it has limited time to achieve its aims. And so Putin has, I think, been exceptionally clever, mostly successful. He has frightened us. Georgia is not coming into NATO. Ukraine is not coming into NATO. We're not going to fight for Ukraine. I mean, this is a very sad history for, of course, the Czechs, because there's a phrase in English, a faraway country about which we know little. And this was said in 1939 by the British. We're not going to go to war for a faraway country about which we know little. I mean, we paid the price. Slovakia paid the price, and then we all paid the price for being weak. But at the moment, we will not protect Ukraine, I don't think, or Georgia, because the Russians have used their power very well. So they're very dangerous. They know they have limited time. You can't rule out influencing the Baltics to a degree where there's violence. And you can't rule out their continuing aggression as they impose their authority. They try to impose their authority in what they regard as their near abroad.
Now, I should say, by the way, at this point, if you're watching this live, we welcome questions or comments throughout this conversation. So feel free, please, if you want to put it in Czech or English or whatever language you happen to be, we've got translators on hand. Please, we may, if it's an obscure language, we might struggle, but please feel free to ask questions, make comments, give us feedback. We'd welcome that as we talk. So now we've looked at Europe from Russia. Let's look at Europe from Europe. So what COVID has done in Europe is, in many ways, had the countries of Europe go back to their national boundaries, be very worried about their not just COVID. Of course, before that, there was the onset of immigration through Greece and Italy, which was already putting strains. There was the economic strains. Now COVID has created even more strains. Without going into perhaps just the details of the politics of Europe, but what part does geography play in the way in which the EU countries have reacted to what's going on right now, do you think?
Well, that's a difficult one, because geography helped create the nation states in the shape that they are. There is a reason that France ends at the river and Germany begins, and that's why they are the shape that they are. So once they have been created, the nation states, at that point, they normally seek to look out first for the nation states. But we're too polite to say so. Mr. Trump in America has said America first, and we regard it as very vulgar. Secretly, most countries, Czech first, France first, Germany first. But we've learned, because of our history, where that can lead. And we've learned, because of our history, to try to dampen it, to suppress it, and to come together, European Union. The two biggest challenges that came this century to the European Union was firstly the migration, and we failed. Mrs. Merkel said willkommen, and the Czech Republic, and the Hungarians, and the Poles, and the Slovaks, the Visegrad group, they said, no, you're not willkommen, and don't tell us from Berlin what we do in our countries. The EU failed at the first big test. And then came COVID, a brilliant opportunity for the nation states to gather in Brussels with the EU and have a concerted 27-country response. It didn't happen. Every single country retreated immediately back to the nation state and had its own policies, its own way of dealing with things. Sweden went one way, France went another. France blocked medicines from leaving the country. Some countries had orders that they'd ordered even before COVID, and then it came to COVID, and France said, they're not leaving our borders, these medicines, these goods. I'm afraid it failed again. It's caught up a little bit. There has been some cooperation, but I'll give you an example. There's something called the stability mechanism at an EU level, and the civil protection mechanism. Italy, which suffered first terribly, screamed out for help for the stability mechanism to kick in from Brussels and for money to be shared out and equipment to be shared out. And the nation states went to Brussels and said, no. It failed. And it's a blow to whether the EU can survive. I think the EU can survive. I don't think ever closer union. It's finished. It's finished.
One area, just before we move on, just briefly, I think, because there's so much else to discuss, but one area where geography has played a huge part in Europe is Brexit. And we're both speaking from Britain, where we feel that. And I just would, for those that don't fully appreciate just how important it is that Britain is an island in the mentality that has led to Brexit. Do you see that?
Yeah, I don't think we understand how important that. It's a very thin strip of water between us and France, and a slightly wider one between us and Scandinavia. I don't think even we understand how heavy that is in our psyche, in the national psychology. But we imbibe, we eat and drink through our history and our learning what has happened in Europe for the past 1,000 years. All the wars, revolutions, the extremes of the extreme right wing and the extreme left wing. The Czech Republic, of course, knows very well costs of that from both sides. And we have managed to put a buffer, very thin one. That's why we built such a brilliant navy for so many centuries, to make sure we control this buffer. And Brexit has come at a time when the migration crisis has hit Europe, when some of the extremes of politics are beginning to surface in Europe. Look at Germany, the AfD. And when the nation state is coming back into fashion. It never went out of fashion. The intellectuals think it did. It never went out of fashion. And so you put all this swirling stuff together. And then the last bit, the deal with the EU, Stuart, is you will give us some of your sovereignty and we will give you prosperity, a good life. After the 2008 crash, there are enough people in Britain who think, where's my good life? Where is it? And if I can't have that, well, I want my sovereignty. I'm not making an argument for or against it. I'm simply saying why I think it happened. And that little strip of water that played such a role in our geography and our history was an element in it.
Yeah. I remember when I had a discussion with my ex-wife about this, and she said, why would the EU be responsible for the quality of water in our waterways? What's it their business about our waterways? I said, because you've got to realize that almost every other country in the EU, their waterways all flow into each other. They're all the same waterways. And so it really makes sense to have common standards that they can all count on. That's a really good thing if you're Austria or Italy or Germany or Holland, or because you want to count on the quality of the water of your neighbours. If you're Britain, it's this contained island, of course it doesn't feel quite so logical. And,
no, but I mean, I personally agree with that, most of those sorts of regulations, because what the idea was to create, and they've actually succeeded, to create the world's biggest, most successful, peaceful economic union. There's never been anything like it in history. It has been a success. I just think there have always been limits to how much sovereignty, which goes back to our tribalism. And I think, again, intellectuals underestimate how tribal many of us feel. And so if you push this too quickly, too fast, I mean, I know Czech Republic, I don't think has joined the Euro, some of the Scandinavians. When you push it too fast, people say, hang on, and they push too fast.
Yeah. Let's travel around the world a bit more, because we've done Europe, we've done Russia. I want to talk about China. In this book, I found fascinating the discussion about China and the understanding of how the geography of China drives so much of its decision making. Obviously, the scale is important too. And I'd very much, China right now is suddenly seen from being the great opportunity for everyone to being the great threat. It dwarfs Russia as a threat, suddenly the bad guys. And I just really like to appreciate, again, the same. Let's go into the heads of the Chinese. What does geography tell them they need to do, and how is that driving what they're doing today?
Okay. First, I need to have an aside to explain why I don't argue it is entirely deterministic. It is not written in the stars what will happen because of geography. But if you briefly look at America, and you look at the politics of America in its early days, when they'd stolen the land from the people that were already there, they then gave it. They gave it away to hundreds of thousands of people who then owned the land and who had a reason to make it successful. And then you look at Latin America, which all they did, the conquistadors, was come to the New World and bring the old world's way of doing things. The big landowners took all the land, didn't bother to connect all the places in Latin America, and to this day, they are a century behind, decades behind, because the Americans got the politics right. So, the geography gave them these opportunities, and they got the politics right. So, come back to China. I just wanted to make sure that, I'm not being deterministic. The Chinese, you must understand, of the 1.2 billion, 90% of them are ethnically Han. You have Mongolians, you have Tibetans, you have Uyghurs, but 90% of the people are Han Chinese. So the Han live in the Han heartland. To their immediate north is Mongolia. So they took out of Inner Mongolia because they used to be invaded that way. Then they went to Xinjiang, a Muslim, Uyghur, Turkic-speaking region, and they took that. And there's no way through from Kazakhstan now. And then they went to Tibet, and they took that for a number of reasons. Mostly the water, all of China's water comes from Tibet. They will never let it go. But also, it's the high ground. If they don't have it, maybe the Indians would have it. I don't care if the Indians want it or not. They might want it. I'll take it. So they now have this buffer around 3/4 of China. The weak spot, and it's always been a weak spot, is the coastline. It's where we, the Brits and the other imperialists, went and got them. So they have spent the last 30 years now trying to create a different buffer. Obviously, it's water. So they're doing three things. One, they look out and they see in front of them a wall Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, all of them America's friends. So they're doing three things. One, they are investing in shore-to-ship missiles, serious equipment with serious distance to push the Americans further away. Two, they're building islands in the South China Sea and saying this is Chinese territory. The Americans ignore them, but eventually they will say, we're telling you not to come here, we're not asking you. And the third, through these things, they're trying to persuade the wall to give up America and join them. And this is a 50-year strategy. They're a couple of decades into it. It's quite successful. And from their perspective, they will get the last part of the buffer around them.
So how does the Belt and Road Initiative fit into that? Because for those that don't know that, this is China, in theory, attempting to recreate what was the old Silk Route, the trading routes that came up through the Middle East and into China. And essentially, some people are saying they're colonizing those countries with money. Other people are saying they're building a genuinely fantastic commercial route, which is going to bring prosperity to many countries that were once very prosperous trading countries.
I think there's truth in both of those things simultaneously. You know, I mean, it is a form, if you like, of neo-colonialism. I mean, especially the way they behave in Africa. But they are also bringing prosperity to some places. If you look at, again, Xinjiang, I mean, they've locked up 1 million Uyghurs there. And that's because there is a nascent independence movement. It was actually independent very briefly for 2 or 3 years in the previous century. And that's where the Silk Road used to run, and the new Belt and Road runs through there. And then it runs up through the Karakoram mountains and down into Pakistan. Now, in the event there was an independent Xinjiang, and the independence movement grew to such an extent that it disrupted that, then the key route out of China, the land route, up past the Karakoram mountains, down through Kashmir, down through Pakistan to the port of Gwadar, which is a massively important port that they have built for the Pakistanis on the edge of the Indian Ocean. Well, that risks being cut. And so they will do whatever it takes to keep that route open. And that includes coercion, but they are bringing prosperity along the road. That, just as, I'll give you another example. The Czech Republic, one of the reasons it's a rich country is its rivers and its flat land, you know, the Elbe. If you live along the Elbe or the Moravia 1,000 years ago, you can grow things and you can put them on barges, and the river is flat and you can sail them 100 miles and sell them. And the town grows up, and the town grows up here, and you become rich and prosperous. On the Belt and Road, the 21st century version is happening. Every few hundred miles, new towns spring up, housing, construction, goods are bought, goods are sold along this new Silk Road. So, you know, it has many positive elements to it, and they are not imperialists in the manner that the Europeans were in the previous 2 centuries.
But so then, should we be scared of China, or is China simply behaving completely understandably in a way that defends itself, but it sets out a way of walls around itself that says this keeps us safe, which we're all trying to be?
Well, again, I think it's possible that both things are true. Should we be scared of China? Yes. I think we should be on our guard, at least. This is a one-party dictatorship that locks up millions and millions of people, notably the Uyghurs, notably the Tibetans, suppresses minorities, suppresses religion, has not got freedom of speech, etc. You know, this is not a nice, cuddly regime. And so we cannot get too close to it. But the problem is we need to get close to it because they're an economic superpower. So we're having all these choices to make. And personally, I think we should keep them at arm's length. Of course, we must trade, of course, but there are limits. Are they about to invade us? No. Are they about to buy the port of Barcelona if Catalonia left the European Union? Yes. How much influence would that give them in that region? a lot. So if you don't mind having a one-party dictatorship superpower massively influencing your economics all over your neighborhood, it's okay. If you do mind that, be very aware of what they are when you're dealing with them. Militarily, they're not a threat to us. They have no designs on us. They simply want to us to buy all their things.
Mm. I mean, a lot of people would say, of course, America pursued exactly the same strategy in large parts of the world.
Yeah, they built an economic empire. I mean,
and that's what large powers do.
You choose. Do you think they are a terribly bad force in the world, not just at the moment necessarily, but over the past century? Or do you think they've been a force for good? Or on balance, are they both good and bad, but better than most countries, and certainly not as bad as the Chinese? So you have to work all those things out. No one is perfect, and just decide. And this is what we are all deciding in the Czech Republic and Britain, and especially Britain because of Brexit. We are going to make some very hard choices. America will tell us, this actually does involve the Czech Republic. The Czech Prime Minister has come out against Hraje, the Chinese phone company, as has the UK, under partially American pressure. The Czech president is another matter. So we made a choice there, and America will be pleased, and they are bigger than us. But will there be many choices to make? And if you make too many that are anti-China, you will pay a price. If you make too many that are American, you will pay a price. So these are the hard choices of the 21st century. But push comes to shove, especially on defense and security issues. That is the one where is the hardest choice. And so for the British perspective, if they ask us next year when our aircraft carrier launches, because we haven't had one for 5 years, we've had a gap, right, we would like you to come with us and sail it around the South China Sea. Mm-hmm. If we say no, that's a big no. So every country will have this sort of choice to make.
Amazing. Well, let's go stay in that part of the world and talk about Australia, because I know that when we're discussing this, a big change that's happened since you wrote this book 5 years ago is the increasing importance of what's going on in the Australian region in relation to the Asian politics of what's going on. So can you just set that out for us? What's going on there, and how is that affecting what's going on in the world, in that part of the world today?
I'm actually writing a follow-up to Prisons of Geography called The Power of Geography, and I'm looking at some of the areas I didn't go into detail in. And one of them is Australia. And I think I open it something like, Australia used to be in the middle of nowhere, became somewhere, and is now front and center everywhere. It's something like that. And this is because of the rise of China mostly. I mean, it was a British colony. It was a massive place, a continent, but it wasn't very important to us in our empire. And then it grew more and more important as the world grew up around it, and Japan grew, and now China. And so you simply look at a map of where it is. And if you wish to influence the Indo-Pacific region, there's no better power to have on your side. China knows that, and America knows that. So what's happened in the past 5 years is something called the Quad has grown in importance. This is Japan, America, India, and Australia. And this Quad can together challenge Chinese naval power in the Indo-Pacific region, and it is doing. And there's now even the Quad Plus. South Korea would like to join. And it's precisely because of the sea lanes of the world. Again, you get the atlas out, you look at the map, and you see the Strait of Malacca, very narrow. China gets something like 80% of its energy through the Strait of Malacca. And they know if they cut that, they are in big trouble. It's one of the reasons they've actually had the port in Gwadar and then a road transport, but it's a lot cheaper to transport things by sea. So they have been challenging the Quad, they are very concerned that anybody could have the power to cut it. The other way of looking at that is that there are international sea lanes in the world and they are open to everybody. And China does not have the right in the South China Sea to say you cannot sail through here. But they will when they build more islands and put more runways on them and say this is sovereign territory, which legally I don't think it is under the law of the sea, because you have 12 miles from your shoreline, which is your sovereign territory, and 200 miles, which is your economic territory. And they are saying that these islands they've built and made, you can't come within 200 miles unless we say so. And the Americans say no. So to keep those sea lanes open when China is able to militarily challenge America in about 20, maybe 30 years, America is now building its naval alliance early in that area. It's the flashpoint, potential biggest flashpoint of the 21st century. The Chinese are building what's called a blue water navy to get out into the sea lanes, to get past that wall I spoke about. And one of the powers down there, one of the trained, equipped, first world naval powers down there is Australia. And it has become more and more important, and it is becoming more important as each year passes.
Amazing.
Oh, by the way, sorry, I should say, this is why the Americans have got a US Marines base at the very northern tip of it.
Of course, the other interesting dimension to that is that China is a massive customer for Australian minerals.
Coal as well, yeah.
It's been, as a country that's had constant prosperity, no recessions, even during the financial crisis, they had endless growth, partly because of the incredible mineral, largely because they have
very much
minerals they fed China with. So I suppose that also both gives China power,
yes,
but also does it give Australia power over China in some way? How does that play out?
Yeah, the trade balance is in China's favor. I mentioned coal. Also, I think it's wheat. I think they buy like 4/5 of Australia's wheat. I may be wrong, but they certainly buy 4/5 of one of their products. Yeah. And after Australia last year also said about Huawei, the phone company, because they know it's connected to the party and they don't want it inside their 5G phone system for security reasons. After they said no, the Chinese retaliated with some fairly severe economic embargoes against them to make them pay. And again, this is another example of what I was talking about, that in the 21st century, when you have the Americans and the Chinese, you have a lot of choices to make, and you better make them very carefully. And Australia, if America does not back Australia all the way, they will drift to the Chinese. And there is a historical precedent for this. In 1940 or 41, the Japanese bombarded Darwin in the very north of Australia, and they landed in Papua New Guinea, and they were thinking about invading Australia. And the British had a choice. We could have sent some of our forces and our navy, but we were quite busy at the time, quite busy. Battle of Britain, being chased out of France by the Germans, coming back, Africa, you name it, we were busy. And we pretty much said no. And the Australians openly, their politicians openly said, okay, it's clear you don't care about us enough. The Americans might. And that there was just this in history, it just switched.
Pivot. Yeah.
At one moment, it switched from looking to the UK for security to looking to the Americans for security. And now 70 years on, if the Americans do not still absolutely back them, you will see gradually Australia thinking it better hedge its bets.
That's amazing. I just want to, you talked about America. We've got limited time left, Tim, but we cannot not discuss the power of geography behind the power of America. And we're not talking now just about Donald Trump, as everyone wants to talk about America. We're talking about long-term aspects of American geopower that's underpinned by its geography. And do you mind explaining that and how, that affects what they're doing in the world today? For example, when they look at NATO, which is interesting to me, what they're saying about NATO, And so
let's circle back round to NATO. Trump is not an aberration. He's very vulgar and he's quite shocking because he says things so openly, but he's not that different. He's kept them out of wars, forged a Middle East peace deal. That is different. And he's put America first, but in a vulgar, aggressive, unpleasant manner. But America goes through these periods every few decades. And people write them off and then they come bounding back. And I think they will come bounding back again. They were on their knees, people said, in the 1970s with Jimmy Carter. And then came Reagan. Sorry. But the geography of it, yeah. North Coast, when the colonialists first arrived, beautiful farmland, beautiful ports, and a ready-made market straight across the Atlantic. Fantastic. When you get over the Appalachian Mountains, you're into the Mississippi Basin, which is probably 2/3 of America. Here's the key thing. In that Mississippi Basin, well, in the United States, but mostly in that basin, it's something like 4/5 of the world's navigable inland waterway. If you include the Great Lakes, canal system at the bottom, and then all the rivers that feed, like the Missouri, that feed into the Mississippi, that feed down to the port, beautiful port. Sound like Donald Trump, it's a beautiful port, beautiful. Of New Orleans, which then heads out through the Gulf of Mexico. More of the world's navigable waterway are there than the rest of the world combined. And what is surrounding this waterway? The best farmland in the world. So once you're across and you're in there and you begin to farm and you begin to make things and you begin to put them on the rivers, flat, long rivers, not like rivers in most parts of Africa that fall over waterfalls that you can't send anything anywhere, flat, long rivers like the Elbe. They rise, they rise, they rise. As I said, they gave the land they stole to people. They had an educated population coming in. They had a form of democracy for some of the people. And then finally, they reach the other sea. So now they are a rich first world nation that can project power into 2 oceans simultaneously, and nobody else can do that. So they build a navy capable of doing it, and they build a global empire. So what they've got to their north is a weaker power that's friendly, to their south, Mexico, a weaker power that's friendly, and then to their east and west, 3,000 miles of a barrier before anybody can come and get them. Nobody can come and get America, which is why when 9/11 happened, it was such a psychological shock. When I say, I mean, nobody can invade them, but the very fact that people flew planes into their buildings and killed 3,000 of them was an incredible shock to them, because all you do is look at the map. Nobody can come and get you.
So how does that play out now? Because, for example, the thing I was thinking of was that if you are America, you've paid the biggest bills to NATO. You look out across Europe and you think, actually, no one, are we really in danger from Europe? And yet we're paying an enormous amount of money to protect Europe.
Yeah.
Europeans, which actually have a bigger economy than us, are paying more. In other words, we can argue about the rights and wrongs of that discussion. That's not the point. The point is I'm trying to understand how what you've just described, effectively, they're in a very safe physical space. How that drives the decision-making behind things like that.
Firstly, the whole thing with Trump and NATO, all he did was say in vulgar, unpleasant, rude, aggressive terms what Obama had said. Obama called us all freeloaders. If Trump had said that, he would have said it even more unpleasantly. Every administration for the last 5 decades has asked us to pay more money. He's told us to pay, and some of us are. I happen to think it's one of the very few things that he's actually correct on. If you're an American, why aren't the Europeans paying their share? The Germans in particular, the richest country, why aren't they paying their share? Why have they got such an incredibly weak military?
Anyway, let's not go there.
So they go through these periods. Why does America care about NATO? And here's where Trump may not even be clever enough to know this, although all the proper strategists and every previous American president appears to have known it. One of the reasons the Americans got involved in World War I and bled, and in World War II, and bled even more, is that they do not wish a single power to arise on the European continent and conquer it and become a monolithic power which will challenge America. In 1940s, it was Germany. And Germany did have vague plans that one day it would attack America as well. And the Americans made sure it couldn't happen. And then, of course, after the war, the one main power that may have created a superpower was the Soviet Union. And so America parked itself in Europe because not for just for our sake and just for democracy's sake, but also for America's strategic planning. Now, the threat, is it still there? If Europe breaks up into little pieces and Russia continues to arm itself the way it does and in its weakish manner, but it's still a militarily powerful country, yeah, maybe. And so that's why they're not going to leave NATO, but they are going to try and make sure we pay our share. So it's not altruistic. It is in America's interest for them to have strategic power in the old continent, even though it is now probably secondary to their focus, which is the Pacific.
Yeah, they're looking the other way now much more, of course, and over to China, as we understand. By the way, I should say to anyone watching this live, please in the chat room, put any comments or questions for us. We'd love to get them from you. Tim, I just want to, if we don't, in the absence of questions, just to wrap up, I want to ask you one thing. Obviously, geography is very important, but we appear to be living increasingly in a digital world, in a virtual world, in which a lot of the power that exists in the world is in the digital space, not in the physical space. So is this importance of geography changing or diminishing in some way or not?
Oh, it's changing. It's not diminishing. Trying to think of some examples. Okay, people say, oh, army's pointless now. Well, I think Iraq, well, every single war this century has shown us that they may not be good, but they're not pointless. People say, oh, cyber warfare, that's the future, and therefore geography doesn't matter. Well, hang on. What are you going to do with your cyber warfare? You're going to pick a city, and you're going to pick it for a reason, you know, strategic location, and you're going to turn its water and electricity off and see what happens. That would be an act of war. And so geography has immediately come into it. Why have you picked this city? Why that one to disrupt? What designs do you have on it? What do you want to happen afterwards? There's the first thing, geography. Second thing, if I find that you've done that and I trace it back, I will come and kill you. I will get my super duper special forces, black ops, whatever. I will find who designed this and who signed off on it. I will come to wherever it is and I will kill you. So of course the geography is still important. The geography of where you designed your cyber plot to do this act here.
But my point is, if, you know, whereas once upon a time, the source of your power might be great rivers, flat rivers, you know, access to oceans, mountains in the way, whatever. Now, if I am incredibly powerful, for example, the West Coast of America, which is the center of power for so much of the digital space we all live in, right? I mean, it's not about is it about the geography of the West Coast, or is it simply they've got this cluster of people, of organizations in one place? It could be in Stockholm, it happens to be in San Francisco. If Stockholm was the center of these same companies, which doesn't have the physical power of America, but would happen to have all these companies in one place there, would that make them more powerful? Do you see what I mean?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I mean, economically, very much so. And if you're economically powerful, it enhances your political power because, you know, you can lean on your government to lean on another government because you have the economic leverage. But I mean, I don't see how that changes the geography of it. I mean, if you're making Apple phones, which of course are made in China and designed in California, you still have to go and get the rare earth materials from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which go into these smartphones. You then have to assemble them. You then have to put them on a train and take them to a port and put them in a container ship and sail them across the ocean, I don't see how geography is not every bit as important, but that the Democratic Republic of Congo has risen to become more geographically important because it's got this stuff in the ground. And let's say Iceland isn't important in that manner. So geography always matters in different ways and at different times, and it will never go away. And space is another example where how far is up? Where can you put your satellites above my country? What technology can you have there? And it will all be based on geography, the distance between that satellite and the range that satellite, it'll all be geography. You will always get your map out, it'll be a map of space. I mean, I sound a bit like a high priest of geography. I'm far from that. It's geopolitics. And I can tell we're getting close to the end. So all I'm doing is saying that I completely agree that the history of a country is vital to understand, and the politics of a country and the demographics of a country, and its economic power and this, that, and the other, and its education levels. But if you don't also put into that mix an understanding of the geography and how it helped to shape those things, and those things perhaps shaped it, a border which was changed by a country because it was rich because of its geography. You don't have the whole picture. That's pretty much all I'm saying. It's just that I'm saying it over an entire book.
And there is the book. If you haven't got it, honestly, I recommend it. It's in many, many different languages, Prisoners of Geography. I had on my notes, we were going to talk about the Arctic, about the Middle East. We haven't talked about the Middle East, about Africa. I mean, it's such an interesting and rich subject. But for the moment, Tim, thank you very much for sharing that. And the next book you said is called?
The Power of Geography. And as I said, we're going to things like Ethiopia, Iran, Australia, places that I never really went to in the previous book.
I really look forward to it. Tim Marshall, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.